She walked into the ballroom like a ghost returning from the grave. But ghosts don't wear silk that sharp, and they don't carry rage like diamonds in their eyes. 1 year ago, Lydia Whitmore was humiliated, abandoned, destroyed in front of everyone who mattered. They whispered she'd never recover. They were wrong. Tonight, she's back. Not begging, not broken, but untouchable. And the man who shattered her? He just walked through the door, Duke Rowan Blackthorne. The whispers stop. The room holds its breath. This isn't reconciliation. This is war. Stay until the end to see how a woman written off as ruined becomes the most dangerous player in the game. Drop a like, comment your city, and let's begin. The chandeliers burned too bright, casting merciless light across the polished marble of Ashford Manor's grand ballroom. Every face glowed with champagne and gossip. Every gown shimmered with calculated elegance. This was the heart of English high society in the autumn of 1816. A world where reputation was currency and ruin was a spectator sport. Lydia Whitmore stood at the entrance, framed by towering doors, and the room fell silent. Not all at once. It rippled, a murmur dying mid-sentence, a laugh cut short, a fan snapping closed, heads turned, eyes widened. Then the whispers began, hissing through the crowd like wind through dead leaves. Is that? It can't be. She wouldn't dare. But she had, and she was here. Lydia didn't flinch. She'd spent a year preparing for this moment, and every second of that preparation showed. Her gown was midnight blue, cut with surgical precision to flatter without pleating. The fabric was French silk, imported at great expense, one of the few luxuries her family could still afford, purchased specifically for this night. The bodice fitted like armor. The skirt fell in clean lines without excessive ornamentation. No ruffles, no bows, nothing that suggested she was trying too hard. Her hair was swept high, severe and elegant, with 2 deliberate curls framing her face. No jewelry except small sapphire earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. Nothing to distract from her face, which had hardened into something sharper than beauty. Her eyes, once warm and trusting, were now cool and assessing. Her mouth, which used to smile easily, was set in a line that suggested she'd forgotten how. She looked like a woman who had died and come back different, because she had. A year ago, Lydia Whitmore had been the season's darling, beautiful, sweet-natured, engaged to one of the most powerful men in England, Duke Rowan Blackthorne. The match had been perfect. Too perfect, everyone said, with the kind of envy that tasted like honey and poison. The Duke was young, titled, wealthy beyond measure, and he'd chosen her, the daughter of a minor baronet with more breeding than fortune. It had been a fairy tale, the kind society loved to tell itself. Then, without warning, without explanation, he disappeared. One morning he was there, attentive, intense, whispering promises in moonlit gardens. The next, he was gone. No letter, no message, no word sent through his steward or his family, just silence that stretched into days, then weeks, then months. The engagement wasn't formally broken. It simply evaporated, leaving Lydia standing alone in the wreckage. Society had feasted on her humiliation. The jokes were vicious. What did she do to drive him away? Was she not woman enough to hold him? Perhaps he discovered something unsavory about her family? The pity was worse. The sympathetic smiles, the gentle pats on the arm, the unspoken message. You poor thing. You'll never recover from this. She became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the brightest matches could collapse into ash. Her family had retreated to their country estate in disgrace. Her father, Sir Edmund Whitmore, a baronet with more pride than money, had aged a decade in a season. The shame had broken something in him. Her mother stopped speaking for weeks, taking to her bed with what the physician called nervous exhaustion. Her younger sister, barely 16, had lost her chance at a decent match before even making her debut. No one wanted association with the family that had been publicly humiliated by a duke. And Lydia? Lydia had vanished, but not in the way Rowan had. She hadn't fled to the continent or hidden in some distant manor. She'd gone silent, withdrawn, rebuilding herself in the dark like a sword being forged. She read everything she could find: philosophy, politics, estate management, military strategy. She studied the families that had mocked her, cataloging their weaknesses, their scandals, their debts. She learned which marriages were happy and which were strategic prisons, which fortunes were real and which were smoke and mirrors. She became fluent in French and passable in German. She learned to ride better than most men, taking her horse over jumps that made the grooms nervous. She learned to shoot, practicing until she could hit a target at 50 paces. She studied fencing with her brother's old instructor, ignoring his protests that it wasn't appropriate for a lady. She didn't care about appropriate anymore. She turned grief into fuel and humiliation into armor. She analyzed every mistake she'd made, every moment she'd been too trusting, too soft, too eager to please. She cataloged her weaknesses and systematically destroyed them. She became someone new, someone harder, sharper, unbreakable. And now, 1 year later, she had returned to the world that had buried her. The ballroom stretched before her like a battlefield. At the far end, beneath a portrait of some long-dead aristocrat in powdered wig and velvet, stood the orchestra, mid-waltz. Couples spun across the floor, their movements suddenly self-conscious under the weight of 100 watching eyes. Along the walls, clusters of society's elite pretended not to stare while staring relentlessly. Lydia descended the 3 shallow steps into the ballroom with the kind of calm that only came from absolute control. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply moved, and the crowd parted like water around a ship's prow. She registered faces as she walked. Lady Pemberton, draped in emerald silk, diamonds at her throat, malice in her smile. Lord Ashford, their host, corpulent and cruel, known for ruining reputations over dinner. The Dowager Duchess of Somerset, ancient, powerful, who could make or break a woman with a single cutting remark. Young Lord Hartley, who'd once paid her court before fleeing the moment scandal touched her name. All of them watching, all of them waiting to see if she would crack. "Miss Whitmore," a voice called out, honeyed, fake. Lady Pemberton, draped in emerald silk and malice. "What a surprise! We thought you'd retired to the country permanently. So refreshing to see you've recovered." The words dripped with false sympathy. Every person within earshot turned to watch, sensing blood in the water. Lydia turned slowly, meeting the older woman's gaze without warmth. Lady Pemberton was 50 if she was a day, married to a man who spent more time with his mistress than his wife, but she wielded social power like a weapon. "People think many things, Lady Pemberton," Lydia said, her voice clear and steady. "Reality rarely obliges them. I find it's best not to confuse the two." A flicker of shock crossed Pemberton's face, quickly masked. The old Lydia would have stammered, apologized, retreated with downcast eyes. This one stood her ground, unflinching, meeting the older woman's stare with something that looked almost like amusement. "How droll," Pemberton managed, her smile brittle. "I do try," Lydia replied, and turned away before the woman could respond. A small victory, but victories were built one brick at a time. Before she could take 3 steps, another voice cut in, male, amused, insufferable. "Miss Whitmore. Still sharp-tongued, I see. One might think a year in exile would have softened your edges." Lydia turned to face Lord Ashford, their host, a man in his 50s with a gut that strained his waistcoat and a reputation for cruelty disguised as wit. He'd made his fortune in shipping and bought his title, which made him defensive and twice as vicious. "Sharp enough to match the company, Lord Ashford," Lydia replied smoothly. "Though I confess I expected the conversation here to have improved in my absence. Disappointed to find it hasn't. The same tired gossip, the same predictable cruelties. One would think London's elite could muster something more original." Ashford's smile tightened. Around them, a few guests hid smirks behind gloved hands. Lady Pemberton's fan snapped open with an audible crack. Lydia had just landed a blow, and everyone knew it. "Careful, Miss Whitmore," Ashford said, his voice dropping. "You're in no position to make enemies." "I'm in no position to make friends either, Lord Ashford," Lydia said calmly. "So I might as well be honest. It's terribly liberating. You should try it sometime." She moved past him, threading through the crowd with purpose. She wasn't here to make friends. She was here to reclaim what had been stolen. Her name, her dignity, her power. And she would do it by refusing to play by their rules. The old Lydia had been polite, deferential, eager to please. That Lydia was dead. This one didn't apologize for existing. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing servant, more for something to hold than any desire to drink. The bubbles tickled her nose. She took a small sip, surveying the room with the detached interest of a general assessing a battlefield. The music swelled, a Viennese waltz, elegant and predictable. Couples moved onto the floor. Young women giggled behind fans, hoping to be asked. Young men postured, trying to appear both interested and aloof. It all felt so small now, so provincial and petty. A year ago, this had been her world. These people had mattered. Their approval had meant everything. Now they were just noise. And then she saw him. Across the ballroom, near the terrace doors where moonlight spilled across the marble, stood Duke Rowan Blackthorne. The world tilted. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened on the champagne flute. For one horrible second, she thought she might drop it. He looked exactly the same. Tall, well over 6 feet, broad-shouldered with dark hair that fell slightly too long, brushing his collar. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth that rarely smiled. His eyes were the color of storm clouds before lightning, gray and intense and impossible to read. He wore black, as always. Evening dress tailored to perfection, but somehow wrong for a ballroom, too severe, too military. The coat fit like it had been made by a master, but it looked more like a uniform than formal wear. He didn't belong among the silk and champagne and laughter. He never had. But it wasn't his appearance that stopped her heart. It was the way he was looking at her, like she was the only person in the room, like he'd been waiting, like the past year hadn't happened and they were still… No. Lydia's jaw clenched. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember. For one terrible second, she was back in the garden a year ago. Late spring. The scent of roses heavy in the air, his hands in her hair, tilting her face up. His voice low and rough as he promised her forever. The way he'd kissed her, desperate, consuming, like he was trying to memorize her. "I'll love you until there's nothing left of me," he'd said, "until the world ends and after. You're everything, Lydia. Everything." 3 days later, he was gone. The memory shattered, replaced by the cold reality of what came next. Nothing. He had given her nothing. No explanation, no apology, no closure. Just silence and ruin. Rowan moved. Not toward her, just a shift, a step forward, as if drawn by invisible thread. His eyes never left her face. There was something in his expression she couldn't read. Intensity, yes, but also something that looked almost like pain. Good. Let him hurt. Let him see what he destroyed and know he could never have it back. Lydia was already turning away, spine straight, jaw locked. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She wouldn't stand there like a fool, staring at the man who'd shattered her. She moved deeper into the crowd, putting bodies between them. Her heart was racing, but her face remained calm. Years of training in social graces served her well now. The ability to smile while dying inside was a skill every woman of her class mastered young. "Miss Whitmore," a familiar voice said, warm and genuine. Lydia turned to find Margaret Hastings, one of the few women who hadn't abandoned her during the scandal. Margaret was round-faced and kind, married to a viscount with more books than ambition. Her husband was scholarly and absent-minded, more interested in his library than society. They lived quietly, which had made them safe harbor during Lydia's storm. "Margaret," Lydia said, her mask softening just slightly. "It's good to see you." "And you," Margaret said, squeezing her arm with real affection. "Brave of you to come tonight. Half of London is terrified you'll say something cutting, and the other half is hoping you will. You've already given Lady Pemberton and Lord Ashford something to choke on. I'm impressed." "I'll do my best not to disappoint the gamblers," Lydia murmured. Margaret leaned in, lowering her voice. "He's here, you know." "I noticed. He hasn't stopped watching you since you arrived. It's making people uncomfortable. Lady Ashford asked him if he was well. He barely responded." Lydia's smile was ice. "Let him watch. Let them all watch. I'm not the girl I was." "No," Margaret agreed quietly. "You're not. You're harder now, colder. I understand why, but Lydia, don't let what he did kill what made you special." "What made me special got me destroyed," Lydia said flatly. "I learned my lesson." Margaret looked like she wanted to argue, but she simply nodded. If you need anything tonight, an escape, an ally, a convenient distraction, send word. I'll invent a fainting spell if necessary. Despite everything, Lydia felt a flicker of genuine warmth. Thank you. Margaret squeezed her hand and drifted away, pulled into conversation by her husband, who was enthusiastically explaining something about ancient Greek pottery to a glazed-eyed young man. Lydia was alone again. She moved toward the refreshment table, more to have a destination than any hunger. The table groaned under the weight of delicacies. Candied fruits, tiny pastries, jellies molded into elaborate shapes. Wealth on display. The prodigal daughter returns. Lydia stiffened. She knew that voice, smooth, cultured, with an edge that suggested violence beneath the polish. She turned to face Lord Marcus Kensington. He was handsome in a classical way, golden-haired, blue-eyed, with the kind of aristocratic features that painters loved. He was also a snake, charming, dangerous, and known for ruining women who refused him. He'd tried to court her once, before Rowan. She'd rejected him politely. He hadn't forgotten. Lord Kensington, she said neutrally, you look well, Miss Whitmore. Remarkably well, considering. He let the sentence dangle, his smile knowing. Considering what, my lord? Considering your unfortunate circumstances, the scandal, the shame. One might have expected you to fade into obscurity, yet here you stand, bold as brass. Lydia met his gaze steadily. Did you expect me to hide forever? Or perhaps you hoped I would? Disappointed? His smile widened. Not at all. In fact, I find myself intrigued. A woman who's been through what you have, who rises again, that takes a certain ruthlessness. I respect that. Your respect means nothing to me. Perhaps not. But my protection might. Society can be cruel to women without powerful allies. I could be such an ally, for the right considerations. The implication was clear. Lydia felt rage simmer beneath her calm exterior. I'd sooner ally myself with a rabid dog, she said pleasantly. At least it would be honest about wanting to bite me. Kensington's expression darkened. Careful, Miss Whitmore, you're not in a position to make enemies. I've heard that twice tonight. Yet somehow I remain unconcerned. Perhaps because I've already survived the worst you people can do. What else is there to fear? She walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding but her step steady. 3 encounters. 3 small victories. But the night was long and she could feel exhaustion creeping in. Not physical, but emotional. The performance required to maintain this mask was draining. The evening crawled forward. Lydia danced with safe partners, older men, married men, men who wouldn't presume. Lord Hartwell, 70 if he was a day, whose hand shook but whose conversation was surprisingly sharp. Mr. Thornbury, happily married with 5 children, who spoke only of his family. Colonel Brighton, retired military, who treated her with distant courtesy. She laughed at the right moments, spoke intelligently without threatening, and deflected every pointed question about her absence with practiced ease. I needed time to reflect. Family matters required my attention. One mustn't rush back into society. Timing is everything. Vague enough to satisfy, specific enough to seem honest. But through it all, she felt Rowan's gaze like a brand. He didn't approach. Not directly, but he was always there, at the edge of her vision, standing near the terrace, leaning against a pillar, watching from across the room. Twice she caught him starting toward her, only to be intercepted by someone else. Once by Lord Ashford, who seemed to be lecturing him about something. Rowan's expression was stone, but he listened with forced patience. Once by a woman Lydia didn't recognize, tall, regal, dripping in diamonds and confidence. The woman touched Rowan's arm with easy familiarity. She leaned in, said something that made him nod. She laughed, though Rowan didn't. But he didn't pull away either. Lydia's jaw tightened. Lady Catherine Durwood, Margaret whispered, appearing at her side with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. She pressed one into Lydia's hand. Widow, wealthy beyond measure. Her husband died 2 years ago. Hunting accident, though some say it was more convenient than accidental. She's been seen with the Duke frequently this season. How ambitious of her, Lydia said flatly. They've been together at the theater, at Almack's. She hosted a dinner party last month and had him seated at her right hand. Some say an understanding exists between them. Lydia accepted the champagne, took a sip, and said nothing. She didn't trust her voice. Lady Catherine was beautiful, classical features, dark hair, green eyes that probably looked warm, but struck Lydia as calculating. Her gown was crimson silk, cut daringly low. Diamonds sparkled at her throat, her wrists, her ears. She looked like a woman who'd never been denied anything. She looked like she owned Rowan. "Lydia?" Margaret began carefully. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine. You look like you're about to shatter that champagne flute." Lydia glanced down. Her knuckles were white. She forced herself to relax her grip. "I'm fine," she repeated. "He's been back in London for 3 months," Margaret said quietly. "No one knows where he was before that. He won't say. His steward claims ignorance. His family is silent. But the moment you walked in tonight, he looked like a man who'd seen a ghost. Like everything else in this room stopped existing." "Good," Lydia said quietly. "Let him see what he destroyed. Let him live with it." Margaret sighed, but said nothing more. The confrontation came at midnight. The ballroom had grown warmer, more crowded, more suffocating. Lydia had slipped out onto the terrace for air, needing distance from the noise, the eyes, the weight of pretending every breath didn't hurt. The October night was cold, biting through the thin silk of her gown, but she welcomed it. Cold was clarity. Cold numbed the parts of her that still wanted to scream. The terrace overlooked formal gardens, now shadowed and mysterious under moonlight. Stone paths wound between manicured hedges. A fountain burbled somewhere in the darkness. It should have been romantic. It just felt empty. "You shouldn't be out here alone." She didn't turn. She knew that voice, low, rough, carrying the kind of authority that made men follow him into war and women lose their sense. "And yet," Lydia said, staring out at the dark gardens, "here I am. Strange how I've managed to survive an entire year without someone telling me what I should and shouldn't do." Rowan stepped beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him despite the chill. He smelled like smoke and leather, and something darker, danger maybe, or regret, or both. "Lydia," he said, and the way he said her name, raw, broken, like it hurt to speak it, made her want to scream. "Don't," she said sharply, still not looking at him. "You don't get to say my name like that. You don't get to stand there and pretend you have the right." "I know. You know nothing." She finally turned to face him, and the fury in her eyes made him step back. "You disappeared. One day you were there, making promises, talking about forever, and the next you were gone. No explanation, no letter, no message sent through servants or family or friends, not one word of decency. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To my family?" His face was stone, but something flickered in his eyes. Pain, guilt, maybe both. "I had no choice. Everyone has a choice, Rowan." Her voice shook, but not with weakness, with rage. "You made yours. You chose to leave without a word. You chose to let me stand there, humiliated, destroyed, while the entire world laughed and pointed and whispered. My father aged 10 years. My mother stopped speaking. My sister lost her chance at a future because no one wants to associate with the family you shamed. I was protecting you." Lydia laughed, sharp and bitter. It echoed across the empty terrace like breaking glass. "Protecting me? From what? From you? How noble. How utterly convenient. The great Duke, sacrificing love to protect the helpless girl. What a beautiful story. Too bad it's a lie." "It's not." "Then tell me," she snapped, stepping closer. "Tell me what was so dangerous, so terrible, that you couldn't send one letter, one message, one word to let me know I hadn't imagined everything. Tell me why silence was necessary. Tell me why you let me suffer." His jaw clenched. A muscle ticked beneath his eye. "I can't." "You mean you won't?" "I mean it would put you in danger even now." "I don't believe you," she whispered. "You don't have to," Rowan said quietly, and the resignation in his voice cut deeper than anger. "But it's the truth, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving it if you let me." "I won't." "Lydia." "No." She stepped back, putting distance between them. The cold air rushed into the space, a relief after the heat he radiated. "You had your chance. You threw it away. I don't care why. I don't care what excuse you've crafted to make yourself feel better. You left. I survived, and I don't need you anymore." For a moment, he looked like she'd struck him. His expression cracked, revealing something underneath, pain so raw it was almost physical. Then it was gone, replaced by something colder, sharper. "You think you don't need anyone," he said, his voice dropping. "You think you've built walls high enough to keep the world out. But walls don't make you strong, Lydia. They make you alone. And alone means vulnerable, no matter how sharp your tongue or how cold your eyes." "Better alone than broken," she shot back. "You're already broken," he said softly, and the gentleness in his voice was somehow worse than cruelty. "You're just better at hiding it now. You've traded warmth for armor and love for survival, but that's not living. That's just existing." The words hit like a blade between the ribs. Lydia felt something crack inside her, but she didn't let it show. She couldn't. If she cracked now, she would shatter completely. "Go back to Lady Catherine," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside. "I'm sure she's waiting. She seems quite proprietary." Rowan's eyes darkened. "Catherine means nothing." "Then you're crueler than I thought, using her the way you used me. At least be honest about what you are." "I never used you." "No," Lydia said, her smile cutting. "You just destroyed me. So much better, so much more noble. The Duke who broke a woman to save her. How heroic." "That's not—" "I don't care," Lydia interrupted. "I don't care what you tell yourself. I don't care about your reasons or your regrets or your pain. You gave up the right to my care when you vanished. Now you're just nothing. A stranger who looks like someone I used to know." She turned and walked toward the door, her steps measured and deliberate. She would not run. She would not give him that. "Lydia." She stopped. She didn't know why. She should have kept walking. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I know it changes nothing. I know it's too late. But I'm sorry for the pain I caused. And I'm sorry I can't tell you everything you deserve to know." She didn't turn around. "Your apology means nothing, and your secrets mean less." Then she walked back inside, leaving him standing alone in the cold. She didn't look back. She didn't let herself. But her hands were shaking, and her heart was screaming, "Osam." The rest of the night blurred. Lydia danced. She smiled. She played the role of the woman who had risen from the ashes. But inside, she was screaming. Every moment felt like balancing on a knife's edge. One wrong word, one crack in the facade, and everything would collapse. She avoided Rowan for the rest of the evening. When she saw him across the room, she turned away. When he moved in her direction, she engaged someone else in conversation. She would not give him another chance to crack her armor, but avoiding him didn't stop her from feeling his presence. It was like trying to ignore a storm. Impossible. By the time the ball ended, well past 2 in the morning, Lydia was exhausted, not from the dancing, but from the performance. The mask she wore was heavy, suffocating, a second skin she couldn't shed. She made her farewells with perfect courtesy, thanked Lord Ashford for his hospitality with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, accepted compliments on her gown, her conversation, her remarkable recovery with grace that cost her. Her carriage was waiting in the long line of vehicles. She climbed inside, pulled the curtain, and finally let herself breathe. The tears didn't come. She wouldn't let them. But the rage did, hot, bitter, all-consuming. It filled her chest, pressed against her ribs, demanded release. Rowan Blackthorne thought he could walk back into her life with cryptic apologies and expect forgiveness. He thought one conversation would undo a year of silence and pain. He thought protecting her justified destroying her. He was wrong. Lydia Whitmore had been humiliated once. She had been broken, mocked, abandoned by the man she loved and the society she'd trusted. But she had clawed her way back, rebuilt herself into something harder, sharper, unbreakable. And she would never, ever let anyone break her again. Not even him. Especially not him. The carriage rolled through London's dark streets, carrying her back to the townhouse her family had borrowed for the season, a smaller, less fashionable address than they'd occupied before the scandal, but respectable enough. Tomorrow, the gossip would spread. Everyone would be talking about her return, her confrontations, the tension between her and Rowan. Let them talk. She was done caring what they thought. The next morning arrived with gray skies and bitter wind rattling the windows of the Whitmore townhouse. Lydia woke before dawn, tangled in sheets that felt like restraints. She'd barely slept, her mind churning through the previous night's encounters, replaying Rowan's words, his expression, the way he'd looked at her like she was something precious he'd lost. She threw off the covers and dressed herself without ringing for her maid. A simple morning gown, practical and warm. She needed air, space. Somewhere the walls didn't press so close. By the time she made it downstairs, her father was already in his study, door closed, as it had been most days since the scandal. Her mother hadn't left her rooms in 3 days. The house felt like a tomb, everyone living separate, silent lives under the same roof. Lydia grabbed her writing habit from the wardrobe in the front hall and changed quickly. Within 20 minutes, she was mounted on Stella, her chestnut mare, heading toward Hyde Park through streets still quiet with early morning. The park was nearly empty, just a few dedicated riders and their grooms. The Serpentine glittered under weak sunlight breaking through clouds. Lydia urged Stella into a canter, then a gallop, letting the cold air burn her lungs and clear her head. She rode hard for 30 minutes, pushing until her muscles ached and her thoughts finally quieted. When she slowed near the south gate, breathing heavy, she felt almost human again. Almost. "Miss Whitmore." The voice cut through her fragile peace like a knife through silk. Lydia pulled Stella to a halt, turning sharply in the saddle. Lady Catherine Durwood sat astride a sleek black mare, looking every inch the aristocrat in a crimson riding habit that probably cost more than Lydia's entire wardrobe. Her posture was perfect, her expression pleasant and venomous in equal measure. "Lady Catherine," Lydia said coolly, keeping her voice neutral. Catherine guided her horse closer with expert ease. "I thought I might find you here. Rowan mentioned once that you preferred early mornings, something about clarity and silence." She smiled. "He speaks of you often, actually. It's almost touching, really. The great love that never was." Lydia's grip tightened on the reins, but her face remained impassive. "How poetic." "I'll be direct, Miss Whitmore, because I respect efficiency." Catherine's smile sharpened. "I know what you're doing. Returning to society after a year, stirring up old feelings, reminding him of what you were. It's a clever play. I might have attempted something similar in your position, but it won't work. I'm not playing anything." "Aren't you?" Catherine tilted her head, studying Lydia like a problem to solve. "You walk into that ballroom looking like vengeance in silk. You engage in verbal sparring that has half of London buzzing. You avoid Rowan all night, except for one dramatic encounter on the terrace. Yes, that was noticed by several people. And you expect me to believe this isn't strategy?" Lydia met her gaze steadily. "I expect nothing from you, Lady Catherine. Your beliefs are your own concern." "Rowan is mine now," Catherine said, dropping the pleasant pretense. "We have an understanding. He's moved on. Whatever you were to him exists only in memory, and memory fades, especially when replaced by something present and tangible." "If he's yours," Lydia said quietly, her voice carrying an edge that could cut glass, "then why are you here warning me off? Shouldn't you be secure enough not to care? Confident enough not to worry?" Catherine's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but Lydia caught it. "I'm protecting what's mine," Catherine said, "as any intelligent woman would." "Then we have nothing to discuss," Lydia replied, "because I'm not interested in what's yours or anyone else's. I'm interested in rebuilding my life on my terms. Rowan Blackthorne is part of my past. He'll stay there." She urged Stella forward, moving past Catherine without waiting for a response. "He'll break your heart again," Catherine called after her. "Men like him always do. They're storms, Miss Whitmore, beautiful and destructive. They leave wreckage in their wake." Lydia didn't look back. "Then it's fortunate I've already survived the worst storm of my life. What's one more?" She rode away, feeling Catherine's stare burning into her spine. But beneath the bravado, her heart was racing. Catherine wasn't wrong. Rowan was dangerous. Not because he was cruel, but because part of Lydia, the part she'd tried so hard to kill, still wanted him, still remembered what it felt like to be loved by him. And that terrified her more than any social humiliation ever could. The rest of the week passed in a blur of social obligations. Invitations poured in. Everyone wanted the scandal of the season at their table, their salon, their musicale. Lydia accepted selectively, appearing just often enough to maintain visibility without seeming desperate. She played her role perfectly, poised, witty, untouchable. She deflected questions about Rowan with practiced ease, turned conversations away from the past, and slowly, methodically began rebuilding her reputation. But everywhere she went, she felt him watching. He appeared at Lady Hartwell's afternoon tea, standing near the window while she conversed with the hostess. He was at the theater 3 nights later, occupying a box across from hers, his attention more on her than the stage. He rode through Hyde Park at precisely the time she did, always maintaining distance but always visible. Catherine was often with him, proprietary hand on his arm, whispered conversations, calculated displays of intimacy. Lydia ignored them both. Until the letter arrived. It came by private courier on a gray Thursday afternoon. No crest, no return address. Just her name written in handwriting that made her chest tighten. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal. Lydia, I know you don't want to hear from me. I know I have no right to ask for your time or your attention, but there are things you need to know. Things I couldn't say a year ago. Things that, if you understood, might change everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking you to trust me again. I'm asking for one conversation, one chance to tell you the truth. Meet me tomorrow night, midnight, the old chapel at Thornfield Estate. Come alone. If you don't come, I'll understand, and I'll never bother you again. But if there's any part of you that wants answers, real answers, not the half-truths and evasions I gave you on the terrace, then come. The choice is yours. It always has been. Lydia stared at the letter until the words blurred. Thornfield Estate, his country seat, 2 hours outside London. Isolated, private, dangerous. Every rational part of her screamed to burn the letter and forget it existed. But the irrational part, the part that still remembered how it felt to love him, whispered differently. What if he's telling the truth? What if there's more to the story? What if you never find peace without knowing? She crumpled the letter in her fist, fury and curiosity warring inside her chest. It was a trap. It had to be. Rowan Blackthorne manipulating her one more time, pulling her strings like he had before. But even knowing that, even bracing for disappointment, she knew she would go. Because the woman Lydia Whitmore had become was strong, calculating, and unbreakable. But the girl she used to be, the one who had loved Rowan with everything she had, wasn't quite dead yet. And that terrified her more than anything. The following night, Lydia told her household she was retiring early with a headache. She waited until the house fell silent, then dressed in dark, practical clothing, a riding habit in deep gray, boots, a heavy cloak. She braided her hair tight and grabbed the pistol she'd learned to shoot during her year of exile. If Rowan thought she'd come defenseless and trusting, he was about to learn how wrong he was. She slipped out through the servants' entrance, where her horse was waiting, saddled by a stable boy she'd bribed earlier. The streets of London were dark and dangerous at this hour, but Lydia had mapped her route carefully. She kept to well-lit main roads until she reached the city's edge, then pushed hard into the countryside. The ride to Thornfield took 90 minutes. The moon was half full, providing just enough light to navigate. The landscape rolled past in shadows, fields, woods, the occasional farmhouse glowing with candlelight. Thornfield Estate appeared like something from a ghost story. The main house sat dark and imposing on a hill, surrounded by ancient oaks. The chapel Rowan had mentioned was separate, a small stone building at the edge of the property, half hidden by overgrown ivy. Lydia dismounted 100 yards away, tying her horse to a tree. She approached on foot, one hand resting on the pistol concealed in her cloak. The chapel door stood slightly ajar. Candlelight flickered from within. Lydia paused at the threshold, every instinct screaming danger. This was insane. She was alone, at night, meeting a man who'd already destroyed her once. But she'd come this far. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The chapel was small, simple, beautiful in its austerity. Stone walls, wooden pews, an altar at the far end. Candles burned in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows. And standing near the altar, dressed in black, was Rowan. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression shifted. Relief, pain, hope, all tangled together. "You came," he said quietly. "I'm here for answers," Lydia replied, her voice hard. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, just truth. So talk. Rowan nodded slowly. He looked different here, away from society's glitter and performance. Harder. More worn. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there a year ago, and his face carried new lines of exhaustion. A year ago, he began, I was investigating something, a conspiracy that threatened national security. I can't give you all the details, some are still classified, but there was a network of men working to destabilize England's government, selling information to France, undermining our military, planning assassinations. Lydia's hand tightened on the pistol. You're claiming you were some kind of spy? Not a spy. An investigator. I was recruited because of my connections and my military background. The work was dangerous. I was getting close to identifying the ringleader when I realized something. He paused, his jaw clenching. They knew about you. What? They knew about our engagement. They saw you as leverage, a way to control me or draw me out. Rowan's voice dropped. I received a message. They described what you were wearing that day, what you'd had for breakfast, where you'd walked in the park. They were watching you, Lydia. And the message was clear. Stay away from the investigation or they'd hurt you. Lydia felt ice slide down her spine. You're lying. I wish I were. Rowan pulled something from his coat, a folded piece of paper, yellowed and worn. He held it out. Read it. She didn't move. This could be anything. A forgery? A manipulation? It's not. Prove it. Rowan's expression hardened. The morning I disappeared, you wore a blue morning dress with white embroidery. You had tea and toast for breakfast. You walked in Hyde Park at 10 o'clock and stopped to feed the swans. Your maid's name is Ellen, and she has a birthmark on her left wrist. The cook at your house is Mrs. Henderson, and she was making apple tart that day because you'd requested it. His voice was flat, reciting facts like a military report. Every detail in that letter matched your life perfectly. They were watching you constantly, and they made it clear, continue the investigation, and you'd pay the price. Lydia's breath caught. Those details were accurate, all of them. No one could know those things unless they'd been watching. So you left, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You just walked away. I made a choice, Rowan said. Continue hunting men who would torture and kill you to get to me, or disappear and keep you safe. I chose your life over everything else. You could have told me. And put you in more danger? They were watching, Lydia. Any contact between us would have confirmed you mattered, would have made you a target. His voice cracked slightly. I had to make you hate me. Had to make everyone believe the engagement was broken. Only then would they lose interest in you. So you sacrificed me to save me. Lydia's laugh was bitter. How noble. How utterly convenient for your conscience. There was nothing convenient about it, Rowan snapped, his control finally breaking. Do you think it was easy, leaving you without explanation? Watching from a distance as society tore you apart? I wanted to come back every single day. I wanted to tell you the truth, beg your forgiveness, make it right. But I couldn't, because the investigation wasn't finished and the danger wasn't gone. And now? Now it's over. The network is destroyed. The ringleader is in custody. The threat is eliminated. He stepped closer, his eyes intense. I'm free to tell you the truth, free to ask for a chance to make this right. Lydia stared at him, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to believe him, wanted this explanation to erase the pain and humiliation, wanted everything to make sense. But another part, the harder, colder part she'd built to survive, knew better. Even if this is true, she said slowly, it doesn't change what happened. You made a choice without consulting me. You decided my safety mattered more than my agency. You treated me like a possession to protect instead of a partner to trust. I was trying to keep you alive. You were trying to control a situation by controlling me, Lydia countered. And when that choice destroyed me, you stayed away because it was easier than facing what you'd done. You call it protection. I call it cowardice. Rowan flinched like she'd struck him. You're right. The admission shocked her into silence. You're right, he repeated, his voice rough. I was a coward. I told myself I was being noble, making the hard choice, sacrificing love for duty. But the truth is, I was terrified. Terrified of losing you to violence. terrified of watching you suffer because of my work. So I chose the option that let me survive. Because if you died because of me, I wouldn't have. His honesty was like a punch to the chest. Lydia felt her carefully constructed armor crack. I don't know if I can forgive you, she whispered. I'm not asking you to. Not yet. Rowan's eyes held hers. I'm asking for a chance to earn it. Time to prove I'm not the man who ran, that I've learned from the worst mistake of my life. How? Come to Thornfield, not tonight. I know you won't trust that. But come for a week. See how I live. Meet the people who depend on me. Let me show you who I am when I'm not hiding or running or making excuses. He paused. If after that week you still want nothing to do with me, I'll accept it. I'll leave London. I'll make sure you never have to see me again. Lydia wanted to refuse, wanted to turn and walk out and let him drown in his regrets. But curiosity, dangerous, persistent curiosity, held her in place. Why Thornfield? She asked. Because you need to see the real me, not the Duke who plays society games. The man who runs an estate, protects tenants, makes hard decisions. The man I became while I was gone. His voice softened. And because Thornfield is where I learned what mattered, what I'd lost, what I'd do anything to get back. Lydia closed her eyes, warring with herself. This was insane, dangerous, probably another manipulation. But what if it wasn't? What if this was the truth she'd been searching for? 1 week, she heard herself say. I'll come for 1 week, but I'm bringing my maid, and I'll leave the moment I feel unsafe or manipulated. Relief flooded Rowan's face. Agreed. Anything you need. Any conditions you set. And Catherine. His expression darkened. Catherine is a political alliance my family encouraged. Nothing more. I've never promised her anything. Never given her reason to believe she thinks she owns you. She's wrong. Lydia met his eyes, searching for deception. She found none, just intensity, hope, and something that looked like desperation. I'll come in 3 days, she said. That gives me time to arrange things. And Rowan? If this is another betrayal, if you hurt me again, there won't be a third chance. I'll destroy you, socially, politically, personally. I've spent a year learning how. Don't test me. I won't, he said quietly. I swear on everything I am. Lydia turned and walked toward the door, her heart pounding. Lydia. She stopped but didn't turn. Thank you, Rowan said. For listening, for coming, for giving me a chance I don't deserve. She didn't respond, just walked out into the night, mounted her horse, and rode back toward London. Behind her, candlelight flickered in the chapel windows, casting long shadows across the grounds. Ahead, the road stretched dark and uncertain, and inside her chest, something she'd thought dead stirred back to life. Hope. Dangerous, foolish, terrifying hope. Voici a santan. The ride back to London passed in a blur. Lydia's mind churned with everything Rowan had said, every detail of his explanation. The letter, the conspiracy, the choice he'd made. Part of her still didn't believe him. Couldn't believe him. The hurt was too deep, the betrayal too complete. But another part, smaller, more fragile, whispered that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. She reached the townhouse just before dawn, slipping back inside through the servant's entrance. She stripped off her riding clothes, hid the pistol, and collapsed into bed exhausted. But sleep wouldn't come. Her mind replayed the conversation, searching for lies, for manipulation, for cracks in his story. She found none, which terrified her even more than finding them would have. 3 days later, Lydia stood in her bedroom surrounded by half-packed trunks, second-guessing everything. Margaret had tried to talk her out of going. It's madness, Lydia. You'll be alone with him at his estate, completely under his control. What if he's lying? What if this is all some elaborate seduction? Then I'll leave, Lydia had replied with more confidence than she felt. Her mother had been horrified when Lydia announced the visit. Though Lydia had framed it as a social call to discuss estate matters, not reconciliation, her father had been suspiciously quiet, saying only, "Be careful, men like Blackthorn don't change." Now, watching Ellen pack the last of her gowns, Lydia wondered if they were all right. Was she walking into another trap, or toward the truth she'd been searching for? A knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in," she called. The butler entered, carrying a silver tray. "A delivery for you, miss, from Duke Blackthorn." Lydia's chest tightened. She took the package, small, wrapped in plain paper. Inside was a book, old, leather-bound, well-worn, and tucked inside the front cover a note in Rowan's handwriting. "You always loved Shakespeare. I found this in a bookshop in Edinburgh during my exile. Thought of you. Hoped someday I'd have the chance to give it to you. Travel safely tomorrow. I'll be waiting." Lydia opened the book carefully. It was a collection of sonnets printed decades ago, with handwritten annotations in the margins, thoughts, reactions, interpretations. Rowan's handwriting. He'd read it, thought about her while reading it. For a year, while she'd been suffering, he'd been carrying a book meant for her. Lydia felt something crack inside her chest. Not breaking, but softening. Maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe this wasn't manipulation. Maybe... "Miss?" Ellen's voice broke through. "Shall I pack that as well?" Lydia looked down at the book in her hands, at the annotations written in Rowan's careful script. "Yes," she said quietly. "Pack it." Tomorrow, she would go to Thornfield. Tomorrow, she would face the man who'd destroyed her. Tomorrow, she would discover if redemption was possible, or if she was walking straight into another nightmare. Either way, she would go with eyes open and armor intact. Because Lydia Whitmore was no longer the naive girl who'd trusted blindly. She was something harder now, something forged in fire and humiliation and survival. And whatever happened at Thornfield, she would not break. Not again. Never again. The book lay open in her lap, Rowan's annotations staring up at her like promises written in ink. "Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds," one note read. "But I altered everything and lost what mattered most." Lydia closed the book with trembling hands. Tomorrow would reveal if those words were truth or another beautiful lie, and she would face it alone, the way she'd learned to face everything. The journey to Thornfield began under skies the color of steel. Lydia sat in the carriage with Ellen beside her, the book of Shakespeare's sonnets resting in her lap like a talisman. Every mile that carried her away from London felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying and irreversible. Ellen clutched her reticule nervously. "Miss, are you certain about this? We could turn back. No one would blame you." "I would blame myself," Lydia said quietly, watching the countryside roll past. "I need to know the truth. All of it." The roads grew rougher as they left the well-traveled routes. Thornfield sat in the northern reaches of the Duke's holdings, wild country, all rolling hills and ancient forests. This wasn't the manicured landscape of southern estates. This was harder land, demanding respect. They arrived as afternoon shadows stretched long across the grounds. Thornfield Manor rose from the hillside like something carved from the earth itself. Gray stone, weathered and strong, with towers that had witnessed centuries. Ivy climbed the walls. The windows glowed with warm light. It looked nothing like the fashionable estates near London. It looked like a fortress. The carriage rolled to a stop in the circular drive. Before the footman could open the door, Rowan appeared on the steps. He'd changed since London. Gone were the formal evening clothes, the carefully maintained aristocratic facade. He wore riding breeches, boots splattered with mud, a simple white shirt under a dark coat. His hair was windblown. He looked like he'd been working, not waiting in a drawing room. He looked real. "Lydia," he said, coming down the steps. "Thank you for coming." She accepted his offered hand to descend from the carriage, acutely aware of the warmth of his fingers even through her glove. "I said I would." "I know, but I wasn't sure you'd actually—" He trailed off, something vulnerable flickering in his eyes. "Come inside, you must be exhausted." The interior of Thornfield matched the exterior. Solid, unpretentious, built for function rather than show. The entrance hall had high ceilings and well-worn stone floors. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes covered the walls. A massive fireplace dominated one end, flames crackling. A woman appeared from a side corridor, middle-aged, capable-looking, with iron-gray hair and sharp eyes. She wore a housekeeper's keys at her waist. "Mrs. Brennan," Rowan said, "this is Miss Whitmore and her maid, Ellen. Please show them to the East Wing chambers." "Of course, Your Grace." Mrs. Brennan's gaze assessed Lydia thoroughly. Not with judgment, but with the practiced eye of someone who'd run this household for decades. "Welcome to Thornfield, Miss Whitmore. I hope you'll be comfortable." The chambers were beautiful in their simplicity. Large windows overlooked the estate's grounds. The furniture was old but well maintained. A fire already burned in the grate, chasing away the autumn chill. "Dinner is at 7, Mrs. Brennan said. "His Grace keeps country hours here. If you need anything, ring for Sarah. She'll attend you during your stay." When the housekeeper left, Ellen immediately began unpacking, her movements quick and nervous. "It's not what I expected," she murmured. "I thought a duke's estate would be grander, more, ornate." "It's honest," Lydia said, running her fingers along the windowsill. Outside, she could see workers moving across distant fields, repairing fences. Smoke rose from tenant cottages dotting the landscape. "It's a working estate, not a showpiece." That realization unsettled her. This wasn't the Rowan she'd known in London, the polished duke playing society's games. This was something else entirely. But dinner was served in a smaller dining room, intimate rather than formal. Rowan had changed into clean clothes but remained understated. No elaborate cravat, no excessive ornamentation. "I thought we'd eat here rather than the main dining hall," he said as a servant pulled out Lydia's chair. "The formal room seats 40. Seemed excessive for two." "Practical," Lydia observed, accepting a glass of wine. "Thornfield teaches practicality," Rowan replied, "or punishes its absence." The food was simple but excellent. Roasted chicken, root vegetables, fresh bread. Nothing like the elaborate courses served at London dinners. They ate in careful silence for several minutes before Rowan spoke again. "I want to show you something tomorrow, if you're willing." Lydia met his gaze over her wine glass. "What?" "The estate, the villages. The reason I came back here after I left London." He paused. "I told you I needed to show you who I became. This is where that happened." "And who did you become?" "Someone who had to choose between duty and desire every day," Rowan said quietly, "and learned that sometimes the only honorable choice is the one that destroys you." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. "I'll come," Lydia said finally, "but I'm not promising anything beyond observation." "That's all I ask." Done. Morning arrived with mist shrouding the grounds like a living thing. Lydia dressed in her riding habit, the practical one, not the fashionable London version. When she came downstairs, Rowan was waiting with 2 horses already saddled. "We'll ride," he said. "It's the only way to see everything." They set out across the estate as the sun burned through the mist. Rowan led her through fields where tenants were working, past cottages where children played, along borders where workers repaired stone walls. And everywhere they went, people stopped to greet him, not with the deference servants showed aristocrats in London. With respect, yes, but also familiarity. Warmth. "Your Grace," an older man called from a field. "That fence you helped repair yesterday is holding fine." "Good," Rowan called back. "Make sure Johnson knows he was right about the bracing." "The Duke helped repair a fence?" Lydia asked quietly as they rode on. "Yesterday afternoon. The wood had rotted through and the field was vulnerable to deer. We needed it fixed before nightfall." He glanced at her. "In London, I give orders and servants execute them. Here, if something needs doing, everyone who can helps, including me." They stopped at a cottage where a woman stood in the doorway with an infant on her hip. "Mrs. Fletcher," Rowan said, dismounting. "How's the baby?" "Better, Your Grace, thank you. The medicine you sent worked wonders." She smiled at Lydia. "Your Grace brought the physician himself when my William took sick. Wouldn't hear of waiting." "Any child on this estate is my responsibility," Rowan said simply, "your William included." As they rode away, Lydia processed what she'd witnessed. "You brought a physician for a tenant's child?" "I brought a physician for a child," Rowan corrected. "Tenant or not makes no difference when someone's suffering." The next stop was a village on the estate's northern edge. Unlike the prosperous-looking cottages near the manor, these buildings were rougher, newer. "This village burned 2 years ago," Rowan explained. "Lightning strike during a dry summer. 15 families lost everything." "What happened to them?" "I rebuilt it." He gestured to the sturdy stone cottages. "Better than before. Fireproof. with proper drainage and wells. It took 8 months and most of my disposable income that year, but no one went homeless. Lydia stared at the village, at the children playing in the square, at the smoke rising from chimneys. The conspiracy you mentioned, she said slowly. The reason you left London. Was it connected to this? To Thornfield? Rowan's expression darkened. Yes. Tell me. He was silent for a long moment, jaw working. Then, the men I was investigating weren't just selling information to France. They were stealing from estates, embezzling from the crown, bleeding the country dry to fund their operations. I discovered they'd targeted Thornfield, found evidence they'd been skimming rents, forging documents, preparing to seize control of my holdings. How? By destroying my reputation, by manufacturing a scandal so complete that Parliament would have no choice but to strip my titles and lands. His hands tightened on the reins. When I got close to exposing them, they threatened you, told me they'd fabricate evidence that you were part of the conspiracy, that I'd corrupted you. They'd ruin you so thoroughly that your family would be destroyed and I'd be implicated in your downfall. Lydia felt ice slide down her spine. So you left to protect me in Thornfield. I left because they made it clear. Continue the investigation and everyone I cared about would burn. You, my tenants, the families who depend on this estate. His voice roughened. I had one choice. Disappear. Make it look like I'd abandoned everything out of cowardice or scandal. Let them think they'd won. Then continue investigating in secret while they stopped watching so closely. And did you find them? Eventually. Took 11 months. I tracked the ringleader to Edinburgh, gathered evidence, turned everything over to the Crown. He met her eyes. The day the last conspirator was arrested, I returned to London. 3 months ago, but by then, the damage to you was done. And I didn't know how to fix it. Lydia's mind raced, piecing together the timeline, the implications. The conspiracy is truly over? Completely. 5 men hanged, 7 more imprisoned, their network destroyed. Rowan's expression was grim. But the cost was everything I valued. You. My reputation. A year of my life spent hunting shadows while the people I loved suffered. They rode in silence after that, but Lydia's perception of everything had shifted. This wasn't a story of a man who'd abandoned love for adventure. This was a man who'd sacrificed everything to protect what he couldn't bear to lose. The question was whether that made his choice forgivable, or just tragic. They returned to the manor as afternoon shadows lengthened. Lydia's mind churned with everything she'd seen, everything Rowan had revealed. There's more you should know, Rowan said as they dismounted. About why I asked you here specifically. About what I'm offering. Which is? Partnership, he said bluntly. Not marriage, not reconciliation, not yet. But the chance to see if we could build something real. Something based on truth rather than romance. On respect rather than passion. Lydia studied him. You're asking me to consider marrying you again. Eventually, if we both decide it's what we want. But first, I'm asking you to consider if you can trust me, if what I've shown you here matters, if who I am now is someone you could stand beside. And if I decide I can't, then I'll let you go, Rowan said quietly. Truly let you go. No more letters, no more watching from across ballrooms. I'll leave London, stay here, and you'll never have to see me again. So the offer should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like a threat. I need time, Lydia said. Take all you need. You're welcome here as long as you want to stay. That evening, Lydia dined alone in her chambers, claiming fatigue. She needed space to think, to process everything without Rowan's presence clouding her judgment. Ellen brought her supper on a tray, along with a concerned expression. Miss, there's talk below stairs about London. Lydia set down her fork. What kind of talk? A messenger arrived this afternoon, brought news from the city. Ellen hesitated. Apparently there's a scandal brewing about you and His Grace. Lady Catherine is claiming, she's saying you came here to seduce the Duke, to trap him into marriage using false claims of reconciliation. Rage flared hot in Lydia's chest. She's doing what? She's hosting a salon tomorrow night, invited all of society, planning to publicly declare her engagement to His Grace and denounce you as a desperate woman clinging to the past. Ellen wrung her hands. The servants say she's been spreading rumors for days, that you're unbalanced, that you've been stalking His Grace, that this visit is proof of your instability. Lydia stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, Thornfield's grounds stretched peaceful in the twilight. But back in London, Catherine was systematically destroying what remained of her reputation. Does Rowan know? I don't think so, miss. The messenger gave the letter to Mrs. Brennan. I don't believe she's delivered it yet. Lydia's mind raced. If Catherine succeeded, if society believed these lies, it wouldn't matter what truth existed between her and Rowan. She'd be ruined beyond recovery. Her family would suffer. Her sister's chances at a decent life would evaporate. Catherine was betting that Lydia was too far away to respond, too isolated to fight back. She'd bet wrong. Ellen, pack my things, Lydia said, decision crystallizing. We're returning to London tonight. Tonight, miss? But it's nearly dark. I don't care. Get the trunks ready. I'll inform His Grace. She found Rowan in his study, reviewing estate ledgers by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, surprise and pleasure crossing his face before he registered her expression. What's wrong? I'm leaving. Tonight. I need to return to London immediately. He stood, concern sharpening his features. Why? What happened? Catherine is hosting a salon tomorrow night. She plans to announce your engagement to her and publicly denounce me as unstable. If I'm not there to defend myself, if I let her control the narrative, I'm finished. Rowan's expression turned thunderous. There is no engagement. Catherine has no claim. She has society's ear and my absence as evidence. That's enough. Lydia's voice was hard. I have to go back. Have to face this directly. Then I'm coming with you. No. Lydia, no, she repeated firmly. If you appear with me, it confirms everything she's claiming, that I've seduced you, that you're my victim. I have to handle this alone. Like hell you do. Rowan moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. I'm not letting you walk into that viper's nest without support, without protection. I don't need protection. I need the truth. Lydia met his eyes. Tell me honestly, did you ever promise Catherine anything? Ever give her reason to believe you'd marry her? No. My family encouraged the match. Her connections are valuable. But I never agreed, never proposed, never gave her any indication I was interested. Then give me written proof, a letter stating clearly that no engagement exists, that any claims to the contrary are false. I'll use it to destroy her lies. Rowan moved to his desk immediately, pulling out paper and ink. His hand moved quickly, writing with the precision of someone accustomed to legal documents. When he finished, he sealed it with his ducal crest and handed it to Lydia. Take this. Use it however you need. His jaw clenched. But Lydia, Catherine isn't just spreading rumors. She's dangerous. Her husband's death wasn't an accident. There were questions, investigations that went nowhere because of her connections. If she sees you as a threat, then she'll learn I'm a bigger threat than she imagined. Lydia tucked the letter into her bodice, feeling its weight against her heart. I survived being destroyed once, Rowan. I learned from it. Catherine thinks I'm the same naive girl who could be ruined by whispers. She's about to discover how wrong she is. Let me come with you, or send armed men, something. No, this is my fight. She paused at the door, looking back at him. But Rowan? When this is over, when I've dealt with Catherine and proven I can stand on my own, then we'll talk about partnership. About whether what we could build is worth the risk. And if Catherine destroys you first? Lydia's smile was cold. She won't, because I'm not playing by society's rules anymore. I'm playing by survival rules, and in that game, I'm much better trained than she realizes. The carriage ride back to London was brutal. Hours of rough roads and darkness. The horses pushed hard. Lydia used the time to plan, to strategize, to prepare for war, because that's what this was. War. Catherine had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed Lydia was still the broken girl from a year ago, someone who could be crushed by rumors and innuendo. She was about to learn the truth. They reached London just before dawn. Lydia went straight to her townhouse, ignoring Ellen's protests about rest. She had less than 15 hours before Catherine's salon. 15 hours to gather her weapons. She started with Margaret, sending an urgent message requesting an immediate meeting. Margaret arrived within the hour, still in her dressing gown, eyes wide with concern. "Lydia, what's happened? Your note said it was urgent." "Catherine Durwood is hosting a salon tonight. She plans to announce her engagement to Rowan and destroy my reputation in the process. I need your help." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "What do you need?" "Information. You know everyone. Tell me Catherine's weaknesses, her enemies, her scandals, everything society whispers but won't say aloud." Margaret smiled slowly. "I thought you'd never ask." For the next 2 hours, they compiled a devastating portrait. Catherine's first marriage had been strategic, an elderly duke who died suspiciously young, leaving her wealthy but watched. The investigation had been dropped, but whispers remained. She'd had affairs, discreet but known. She'd manipulated younger women out of advantageous matches. She'd used her wealth to buy loyalty and silence. She was powerful, yes, but she was also vulnerable. "If you're going to move against her," Margaret said carefully, "you need to be certain. Catherine doesn't forgive enemies. She destroys them." "I know," Lydia said. "That's why I'm going to strike first and strike completely. No half measures, no mercy." "What's your plan?" Lydia's smile was sharp. "I'm going to accept her invitation, attend her salon, and when she tries to destroy me publicly, I'm going to turn her weapons against her." Margaret looked worried. "That's incredibly dangerous. Everything worth doing is." The rest of the day passed in preparation. Lydia selected her gown carefully, deep emerald silk that made her look regal rather than desperate. She practiced her words, her expressions, her composure. She assembled her evidence, Rowan's letter, the information Margaret had provided, her own observations. By the time evening arrived, she was ready. Catherine's townhouse blazed with light when Lydia's carriage arrived. Every window glowed. Music spilled into the street. This wasn't an intimate gathering. This was a performance designed for maximum impact. Lydia descended from her carriage and walked up the steps alone. No companion, no support. Just her evidence, and her resolve. The butler who answered looked shocked to see her. "Miss Whitmore, Lady Catherine didn't mention you were invited." "I'm sure it was an oversight," Lydia said smoothly, walking past him into the entrance hall. "Please announce me." The salon fell silent when her name was called. Every head turned. Every conversation stopped. Catherine stood near the fireplace, draped in burgundy silk and diamonds, Rowan's mother beside her. The older Duchess looked uncomfortable. Catherine looked triumphant. "Miss Whitmore," Catherine said, her voice carrying across the room. "How unexpected. I wasn't aware you'd returned from the countryside." "I travel quickly when necessary," Lydia replied, walking into the room with her head high. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion. When I heard you were hosting an important announcement, I felt I should attend." Catherine's smile sharpened. "How thoughtful, though I'm not sure this evening's business concerns you." "On the contrary," Lydia said calmly, "I believe it concerns me very much. You're planning to announce your engagement to Duke Blackthorne, are you not?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Catherine's expression flickered, surprise that Lydia knew, calculation about how to proceed. "I am," Catherine said carefully. "The Duke and I have reached an understanding. It seemed appropriate to make it official." "Fascinating," Lydia said, "because I have a letter here, She produced Rowan's sealed document, written by the Duke himself, stating categorically that no such engagement exists, that any claims to the contrary are false and unauthorized. The room erupted in whispers. Catherine's face went white, then red. You're lying. That document could be forged, sealed with the ducal crest and signed in the Duke's own hand, witnessed, dated yesterday. Lydia's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Would you like to examine it? Perhaps Her Grace, she nodded to Rowan's mother, could confirm her son's signature? The Dowager Duchess looked between them, clearly caught off guard. I was told an understanding existed, that Catherine had my son's word. I'm afraid you were misinformed, Your Grace, Lydia said gently, as was everyone here tonight. Catherine stepped forward, fury blazing in her eyes. You scheming little, you went to Thornfield to seduce him, to manipulate him into writing that letter. Everyone knows you've been obsessed with reclaiming him, no matter the cost to your dignity. Dignity? Lydia's laugh was sharp. That's rich coming from you, Catherine. Tell me, should we discuss dignity? Should we talk about the circumstances of your first husband's death? The investigation that was conveniently dropped? Or perhaps we should discuss Lord Hartley, who you ruined last season when he chose another woman over you. Catherine's face went rigid. How dare you? I dare because I'm done being silent, done letting women like you destroy others to build your own power. Lydia's voice rose, carrying to every corner of the salon. You spread lies about me being unstable, desperate, obsessed. But the truth is simpler and uglier. You wanted the Duke, he didn't want you, and rather than accept reality, you tried to manufacture a claim that didn't exist. That's not— Prove me wrong, Lydia challenged. Show me any letter, any witness, any evidence that the Duke proposed marriage, any real proof of your so-called understanding. Catherine's mouth opened, closed. She had nothing, because there was nothing to have. The silence stretched, damning and complete. Then Rowan's mother spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Catherine, is this true? Did you fabricate an engagement that never existed? We had an understanding, a verbal agreement, which my son has explicitly denied. The Dowager Duchess's expression was ice. You used my encouragement of a potential match to claim an actual engagement. You manipulated me, and you've embarrassed this family publicly. Catherine looked around the room desperately, seeking allies. She found none. The crowd watched with the hungry fascination of predators scenting blood in the water. This isn't over, Catherine hissed at Lydia. You think you've won, but I know I've won, Lydia interrupted, because I have truth on my side, and you have nothing but lies and desperation. Now, if you'll excuse me. She turned to leave, her point made, her victory complete. And then Catherine grabbed a crystal decanter from a nearby table and threw it. The heavy glass flew through the air, aimed directly at Lydia's head. Time seemed to slow. Lydia saw it coming, but couldn't dodge fast enough. The decanter struck her temple with a sickening crack. Pain exploded through her skull. The room tilted. Her vision went dark at the edges. She felt herself falling. And the last thing she heard before unconsciousness claimed her was screaming. Lydia woke to white ceiling, white walls, and pain that felt like her skull had been split open. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. The world tilted violently, nausea rising in her throat. Don't, a familiar voice said. Gentle hands pressed her shoulders back against pillows. You have a concussion. The physician said you need to stay still. Lydia's vision slowly focused. Margaret sat beside the bed, face drawn with worry. Behind her, standing near the window, was Rowan. His expression was terrible, guilt and rage warring for dominance. What happened? Lydia's voice came out hoarse. Catherine threw a crystal decanter at your head, Margaret said bluntly. In front of 50 witnesses, you collapsed. There was blood everywhere. We thought— Her voice broke. We thought she'd killed you. Memory flooded back. The salon, the confrontation. Catherine's face twisted with fury. The decanter flying through the air. Where am I? My townhouse, Rowan said, moving closer. The physician wouldn't allow you to be moved further. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. Lydia tried to sit up again. This time, Rowan helped her, propping pillows behind her back with surprising gentleness. Catherine? She asked. Arrested, Rowan said flatly. Assault in front of witnesses. The magistrate took her into custody immediately. She's being held pending charges. Her connections won't help her this time, Margaret interrupted. Lydia, everyone saw it. The Dowager Duchess, Lord Pemberton, Lady Ashford, half of society's elite watched Catherine Durwood attempt murder because you exposed her lies. There's no covering this up, no making it disappear. Lydia closed her eyes, processing. She'd gone to that salon prepared for social warfare. She'd expected lies, manipulation, perhaps sabotage. She hadn't expected physical violence, but maybe she should have. A woman cornered was dangerous. A woman humiliated was deadly. The letter, Lydia said suddenly, touching her bodice. Did it survive? It's safe, Rowan assured her, and it's already circulating. By tomorrow morning, all of London will know Catherine fabricated the engagement. Combined with her assault on you, her reputation is destroyed, completely. Good, Lydia whispered. Then, despite the pain, despite the exhaustion, good. Margaret squeezed her hand. You should rest. The physician said at least 3 days of bed rest, possibly more, depending on how the healing progresses. I don't have 3 days. You need to heal, Rowan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. The battle is won, Lydia. Catherine is finished. You proved your point. Now let yourself recover. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was fine, that she needed to press the advantage, consolidate the victory. But exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. Will you stay? She heard herself ask Rowan, hating how vulnerable the question sounded. As long as you need me, he said quietly. I'm not going anywhere. The next 3 days passed in a blur of sleep, pain, and gradually returning strength. The physician visited twice daily, monitoring her recovery with professional concern. Rowan stayed close, reading to her when she couldn't sleep, sitting in silence when she needed quiet, handling the flood of visitors and messages that arrived hourly, because London was in an uproar. Margaret brought news each afternoon, delivering the latest developments like dispatches from a battlefield. Catherine's family has disowned her, she reported on the second day. Publicly, her brother released a statement condemning her actions and severing all connection. The charges have been upgraded to attempted murder. Apparently the decanter could easily have killed you. She'll go to prison, Lydia said. Most likely. Her lawyers are trying to argue temporary insanity, but with 50 witnesses. Margaret shook her head. She destroyed herself, all because she couldn't accept losing. What about society's opinion? Margaret's smile was grim. You're a hero, Lydia. The brave woman who exposed a liar and nearly died for it. Invitations are pouring in. Everyone wants you at their events. Lady Pemberton, who mocked you at the Ashford ball, sent flowers and a note of apology. You've gone from scandal to celebrated in less than a week. Lydia laughed, then winced as pain lanced through her head. How perfectly ridiculous. Isn't it? They destroy you one moment, worship you the next. Society is nothing if not consistent in its hypocrisy. That evening, when Margaret had left and Rowan brought dinner on a tray, Lydia finally asked the question that had been haunting her. Why did you really stay? In London, I mean. You could have returned to Thornfield, let me recover here with Margaret, but you've been here every day, every night. Why? Rowan set the tray down carefully before answering. Because watching you fall, seeing you hurt, it nearly broke me. I've spent a year living with the guilt of leaving you. I'm not adding the guilt of abandoning you when you needed help. I'm not your responsibility. No, he agreed. You're not. But you're... He stopped, searching for words. You're the woman I love, the woman I've always loved, the woman I destroyed trying to protect. And if there's any chance of earning your forgiveness, of proving I'm not the coward who ran, it starts with being here, being present, being the man I should have been from the beginning. Lydia's throat tightened. I don't know if I can trust you again. I know. I don't know if love is enough to rebuild what was broken. I know that too. Then why stay? Rowan met her eyes, his expression raw. Because hope is all I have left. Hope that maybe, someday you'll look at me and see someone worth trusting again, worth risking your heart for again. And until that day comes, if it ever does, I'll be here, proving myself, not with words, but with actions. And if that day never comes, then I'll have spent my life trying to be worthy of a woman who deserved better than I gave her. That's not a waste, that's penance. Lydia looked away, blinking against tears that threatened. This man, this complicated, damaged, honest man, wasn't the polished duke who'd courted her in London. He was something harder, something real, something that scared her precisely because she wanted to believe in it. I need time, she whispered. Take all you need, Rowan said. I'm not going anywhere. By the 4th day, Lydia was strong enough to sit up for extended periods, to take short walks around the room. The physician pronounced her recovery progressing well, though he warned against any strenuous activity for at least another week. Rowan's townhouse had become her sanctuary, away from her family's worried hovering, away from society's suddenly favorable attention. She could think clearly for the first time since the salon. Catherine was ruined. That victory was complete. But what came next? The question plagued her during the quiet hours. She'd proven she could survive society's cruelty, could fight back against those who tried to destroy her, could stand alone and win. But did she want to keep standing alone? That evening, she found Rowan in his study, reviewing correspondence by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, surprise and concern crossing his face. "You should be resting." "I've rested enough. I need to talk." He set down his pen immediately, giving her his full attention. "About?" "About what happens next. Between us." Lydia sat across from him, ignoring the faint dizziness that still plagued her. "You said you wanted partnership, that you wanted to prove yourself. I want to know what that actually means." Rowan leaned back, considering. "It means honesty, complete transparency. No more secrets, no more protecting you by keeping you ignorant. If we're partners, you have the right to know everything. The good, the bad, the dangerous. Even if knowing puts me at risk?" "Yes, because you're strong enough to handle risk, smart enough to make your own choices. And I was wrong to ever think otherwise." His voice was firm. "It means consulting you on decisions that affect us both. Thornfield, London, politics, everything. It means trusting you as my equal, not my dependent. And if we disagree, then we argue until we find compromise. Or you convince me you're right, which frankly happens more often than my pride wants to admit." Despite herself, Lydia smiled. "That's a pretty vision. But what about reality? What about when society pressure builds? When your family demands you marry someone more suitable? When the cost of choosing me becomes too high?" "Then I pay the cost," Rowan said simply. "Because I've already lost you once by choosing everything else over you. I won't make that mistake twice." Pretty words. "Test them," he challenged. "Push me. Make demands. Set conditions. I'll meet everyone or die trying." Lydia studied him, this man who'd broken her and was now offering to piece her back together. "I want control of my own finances. Complete control. Not as your wife's pin money, but as a partner with equal say in how our money is managed." "Agreed. I want input on Thornfield's management. Real input, not symbolic consultation. If I see something that needs changing, I want the authority to change it." "Agreed. I want the freedom to maintain my own social connections, to support causes I believe in, even if you disagree, to have a life that doesn't revolve entirely around being the Duchess." "Agreed." Rowan leaned forward. "Anything else?" "Yes." Lydia's voice dropped. "I want your word, your absolute, unbreakable word, that if danger comes again, you won't try to protect me by pushing me away. That you'll trust me to stand beside you and face it together." Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then, "That's the hardest one. Because every instinct I have screams to keep you safe, even if it means hurting you." "I know. That's why I'm asking for your word. I need to know you can fight those instincts. That you trust me enough to let me choose my own risks." "You have it," Rowan said finally. "You have my word. No more protecting you by leaving you. We face everything together or not at all." Lydia felt something shift in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but the foundation for it. The possibility. "I'm not saying yes," she warned. "Not to partnership, not to marriage, not to anything permanent. Not yet." "I know. But I'm not saying no either." She stood, steadying herself on the desk. "I'm saying, let's see. Let's continue as we have been. Honest, present. Testing whether what we're building can last." Rowan stood as well, hope kindling in his expression. "That's more than I deserve. More than I dared hope for." "Don't celebrate yet," Lydia said dryly. "I'm a demanding partner. You'll probably regret this within a month." "Never," Rowan said with absolute certainty. "I've lived without you. Nothing could be worse than that." The following week brought a development neither of them expected. A message arrived from the magistrate requesting Lydia's testimony in Catherine's trial. The assault charge was solid. 50 witnesses made that indisputable. But the prosecution wanted to establish motive, pattern, context. They wanted Lydia to testify about everything. The fabricated engagement, the campaign of lies, the calculated destruction of her reputation. "You don't have to do this," Rowan said when she showed him the summons. "The assault charge alone will convict her. You don't need to relive everything publicly." "Yes, I do," Lydia replied. "Because this isn't just about Catherine. It's about every woman who's been destroyed by someone more powerful. every reputation ruined by lies. If I testify, if I show that fighting back is possible, maybe someone else will find the courage to do the same. It'll be brutal. Her lawyers will attack your character, your credibility, your past. They'll dredge up every scandal, every humiliation, everything they can find to discredit you. Let them, Lydia said calmly. I've survived worse, and this time I have truth on my side. That's a weapon they can't defeat. Margaret tried to dissuade her. Lydia, trials like this destroy women. The questions they'll ask, the implications they'll make, it's designed to humiliate you. I know. That's why it matters that I don't let them. The trial was set for 2 weeks later, giving Lydia time to fully recover from her injury and prepare her testimony. Rowan's lawyers walked her through the process, the questions she'd face, the tactics Catherine's defense would likely employ. She prepared methodically, treating it like a battle, which, in essence, it was. The day of the trial arrived cold and gray. The courthouse was packed. This was the scandal of the season, and everyone wanted to witness it firsthand. Lydia arrived with Rowan beside her, Margaret behind them. The crowd outside jeered and cheered in equal measure, some supporting her, others hoping to see her broken. Inside, the courtroom was all dark wood and stern faces. The judge looked severe. The jury, all men, of course, watched with varied expressions of curiosity, judgment, and skepticism. Catherine sat at the defense table looking diminished. Gone were the diamonds and silk. She wore simple gray, her hair pulled back severely, her face pale. But her eyes, when they met Lydia's, still burned with hatred. The prosecution called Lydia to the stand. She walked forward with her head high, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The whole truth. And then the questions began. Miss Whitmore, please describe your relationship with Lady Catherine Durwood prior to the incident. Lydia's voice was clear, steady. We had no relationship. We'd met briefly at social functions, but had never spoken at length. Yet she targeted you specifically. Why? Because I was connected to Duke Blackthorne. Lady Catherine wanted to marry the Duke and saw me as an obstacle to that goal. Catherine's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection, speculation. Sustained, the judge said. Miss Whitmore, please confine yourself to facts you can verify. Lydia nodded. Lady Catherine approached me in Hyde Park and warned me to stay away from the Duke. She claimed he belonged to her and that my presence was unwanted interference. What did you say in response? I told her that if the Duke was truly hers, she shouldn't feel threatened by my existence. A ripple of amusement went through the gallery. The judge gavelled for silence. The questioning continued. The prosecution walked Lydia through everything: the fabricated engagement, the salon, the confrontation, the assault. She answered each question with calm precision, neither embellishing nor minimizing. Then came the cross-examination. Catherine's lawyer was a weasel of a man with sharp eyes and sharper words. He approached the stand like a predator circling prey. Miss Whitmore, isn't it true that you have a history of instability regarding the Duke? Define instability, Lydia replied evenly. Obsessive behavior. Pursuing him despite his clear disinterest. Attending events where you knew he'd be present. I attended social functions appropriate to my station. The Duke's presence was incidental. Was it incidental when you traveled alone to his estate? When you spent several days at Thornfield without proper chaperone? I had my maid with me, and I went at the Duke's invitation to discuss estate matters. The lawyer's smile was nasty. Estate matters. How convenient. Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how many other women receive invitations to discuss estate matters at the Duke's private residence? Objection, the prosecution called. Relevance. I'm establishing pattern of behavior, Your Honor. Miss Whitmore's obsession with the Duke is central to understanding why Lady Catherine felt threatened. Lady Catherine felt threatened because she'd lied about an engagement that didn't exist, Lydia interrupted, her voice cutting. And when I exposed that lie, she attempted to kill me. My relationship with the Duke, past, present, or future, has nothing to do with her decision to commit assault. The courtroom erupted. The judge gavelled for order. Miss Whitmore, please wait to be asked a question before answering, he said sternly. My apologies, Your Honor. The lawyer tried again. You claim Lady Catherine fabricated an engagement, but isn't it possible she genuinely believed an understanding existed? That perhaps the Duke gave her reason. The Duke provided written testimony denying any such understanding. It's in evidence. Would you like me to read it aloud? That's not necessary. Because I memorized it, Lydia continued relentlessly. Every word, should I recite it for the jury, or would you prefer to move on to questions that actually matter? The lawyer's face flushed. You're quite bold for a woman whose reputation has been destroyed? Yes, it was. By people who spread lies. But I rebuilt it by standing on truth, something Lady Catherine might have considered before fabricating an engagement and assaulting me for exposing it. The lawyer tried several more approaches, each one deflected by Lydia's calm, precise responses. He tried to rattle her, to make her appear emotional, unstable, obsessed. She gave him nothing. After an hour, he finally gave up. No further questions. Lydia stepped down from the stand, her legs trembling slightly, but her expression composed. She'd done it. She'd testified without breaking, without giving them ammunition. As she passed Catherine's table, their eyes met one final time. Catherine's expression was pure venom. But beneath it, Lydia saw something else. Fear. Because Catherine knew she'd lost. Not just the trial, but everything. But the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Catherine was sentenced to 5 years in prison, a fortune in fines, and permanent social exile. Her title would remain, they couldn't strip that, but her reputation was ashes. As the sentence was read, Catherine's composure finally shattered. She screamed at the judge, at Lydia, at everyone. Guards had to restrain her as she was led from the courtroom, still shouting threats that would never be fulfilled. Lydia watched her go with no satisfaction, no triumph, just exhaustion and a strange emptiness. It's over, Rowan said quietly beside her. Truly over. Yes, Lydia agreed. It is. Outside, the crowd had grown. News of the verdict had spread quickly. When Lydia emerged from the courthouse, someone started clapping, then another, then more, until applause rolled through the crowd like thunder. They were cheering for her, for the woman who'd fought back and won. Lydia stood there, stunned, as people she'd never met celebrated her victory. Margaret was crying. Rowan's hand found hers, squeezing gently. You did it, he said. You actually did it. We did it, Lydia corrected. I couldn't have faced this alone. That night, back at Rowan's townhouse, Lydia finally allowed herself to feel the weight of everything that had happened. Catherine defeated, her reputation restored, the battle won. But battles weren't wars. And winning one fight didn't mean the war was over. Rowan found her on the terrace, staring out at the London night. What happens now? He asked. Lydia turned to face him, this man who'd broken her heart and was slowly, painstakingly earning it back. Now we figure out if what we're building can survive more than crisis, she said. If partnership works when there's no common enemy. When it's just us, deciding whether we fit. And if we don't? Then we'll know we tried, that we were honest, that we gave it a real chance. She paused. But Rowan, I think we might fit. I think we might actually build something real. Hope blazed in his expression. You mean? I mean, I'm willing to try. Truly try. Not because society expects it, not because of our past, but because I want to see who we become together. Rowan closed the distance between them, his hands framing her face with infinite gentleness. That's all I've wanted, all I've hoped for. Then let's find out, Lydia said. Let's see if love can survive truth, if partnership can become something permanent. And if it can, then maybe, Lydia said softly, we'll have earned our second chance. Rowan kissed her then, soft, reverent, nothing like the desperate passion of their youth. This was something deeper, something built on pain and honesty and the terrible courage of trying again. When they finally pulled apart, Lydia was smiling, a real smile. Not armor, not performance, just genuine, fragile hope. And for the first time in a year, the future looked like possibility instead of survival. The weeks following Catherine's conviction passed in a strange new rhythm. London society, ever fickle, had completely reversed its opinion of Lydia Whitmore. The woman they'd mocked and pitied now commanded respect bordering on awe. Invitations flooded in, not the vulture-like curiosity of before, but genuine requests for her presence, her opinion, her influence. Lydia accepted selectively, carefully rebuilding not just her reputation, but her purpose. She began attending salons focused on women's education, lending her name to causes that mattered. She spoke openly about her experience, not as a victim seeking pity, but as a survivor offering a roadmap for others. And through it all, Rowan was there. Not hovering, not controlling, but present. A steady force she could lean on when needed and push against when necessary. They were learning each other again, not the romantic fantasy they'd been, but something more complicated and real. But London wasn't enough. The real test, Lydia knew, would come at Thornfield. 6 weeks after the trial, she made the journey north again. This time with full trunks, her own horse, and no predetermined end date. This time she was coming to see if she could build a life there. Not as an ornament or a duchess playing at estate management, but as a true partner. Rowan met her in the courtyard, his face lighting up in a way that still made her breath catch. "Welcome home," he said, then caught himself. Or, "Welcome back. I don't want to presume—" "Home works," Lydia said, surprising herself with the word. "For now, at least. We'll see if it still feels that way in a month." The household greeted her differently this time. Mrs. Brennan's assessment was warmer, more welcoming. The servants looked at her with curiosity rather than suspicion. News of the trial had reached even this remote corner of England, and apparently defeating a would-be murderess in court earned respect even in the servants' quarters. That first evening, over dinner in the small dining room with candlelight casting shadows across the old stone walls, Rowan laid out his proposition. "I want to show you everything," he said, setting down his wine glass. "Not just the pleasant parts, the problems, the failures, the difficult decisions that keep me awake at night. I want you to see what running Thornfield actually means, the good, the bad, and the brutally hard. And then I want your honest opinion about whether this is a life you could want." "Why the full transparency now?" Lydia asked, studying him across the table. "Most men would show me the rose garden and hide the rot in the foundation." "Because most men are idiots," Rowan said bluntly. "And because I learned the hard way that protecting you from truth only destroys us both. So, tomorrow, we start with the hardest parts. The tenant disputes that have no easy answers, the failing crops that threaten livelihoods, the decisions where every option carries a cost. If you can see all that and still want to stay, then we'll know this is real." Lydia raised her wine glass, a challenge in her eyes. "Show me the worst then. I'm not afraid of hard truths anymore. I've lived through enough of them." The next 3 weeks were brutal education wrapped in beauty. Rowan kept his word. He showed her everything, held nothing back. The tenant family struggling to pay rent after a devastating harvest, forcing a choice between compassion and fiscal responsibility. The aging mill that needed expensive repairs they couldn't easily afford but couldn't function without. The boundary dispute with a neighboring estate that had been festering for 3 years, poisoning relations and threatening violence. The village school that desperately needed a real teacher instead of the elderly vicar who did his best but was losing both his sight and his patience. Lydia threw herself into it all with the intensity she'd once reserved for survival. She visited every tenant cottage, learned every family's circumstances and history, studied the estate's financial records until her eyes ached and numbers danced in her dreams. She attended meetings with Rowan's steward, asked relentless questions that made the old man uncomfortable, challenged decisions that seemed based on tradition rather than logic or fairness. And slowly, methodically, she began to see solutions no one else had considered. "The mill doesn't need complete rebuilding," she told Rowan one evening, spreading architectural plans and financial projections across his desk. "It needs modernization. If we invest in new equipment now, yes, it's expensive, yes, it'll strain our reserves, but it'll increase output by 40% within 2 years. We'll recoup the cost within 3 years and generate enough profit to fund the school properly, hire a real teacher, maybe even expand to serve neighboring villages." Rowan studied her calculations, tracing the numbers with one finger. The steward said rebuilding was the only option, that modernization was too risky, too expensive. "The steward is 60 years old and terrified of change," Lydia said bluntly, no apology in her voice. "He's managed this estate the same way for 30 years. That worked when the world moved slowly. But times are changing. Agricultural prices are dropping. Competition is increasing. This isn't about rebuilding the past. It's about building the future before the future destroys us. You sound like you're planning to stay, Rowan said quietly, hope threading through his words. Lydia met his eyes. I'm planning like this is my responsibility too. Like these decisions will affect my life, my future, my legacy. Whether I stay permanently is still, we'll see. But I'm not going to half commit to anything. That's not who I am anymore. But the truth was, she was beginning to see it. A future here. A purpose that mattered more than any London ballroom ever could. The breakthrough came during a heated tenant meeting in the village hall 2 weeks later. A dispute had erupted between two families, the Turners and the Blackwoods, over water rights to a stream that bordered both properties. The water was essential for livestock and crops, especially during dry summers. The argument had been going on for 8 months, poisoning the entire community with its bitterness. Rowan had tried to mediate before, offering compromises that satisfied neither side. Both families were stubborn, proud, convinced their claim was righteous, and the other's was theft. Lydia sat quietly through the first hour, listening to both sides present their cases, the same arguments they'd made dozens of times before, going in exhausting circles that led nowhere. Then she stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The room fell silent. You're both right, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. And you're both wrong. The stream isn't the problem. The stream has always been there, will always be there. The problem is that you're each trying to own something that belongs to everyone, to the land itself, and that's foolish. Both families started to protest, voices rising. Lydia held up a hand, her expression brooking no argument. What if we built a shared irrigation system, paid for by the estate initially, maintained by both families working together? You'd each get guaranteed water access year-round, controlled amounts measured fairly, no more fighting over who's taking too much. And in return, you both contribute labor to maintain it. Share the work, share the benefit, equal partnership. Silence fell again, heavier this time. The two family heads, Thomas Turner and William Blackwood, looked at each other with decades of suspicion, then at Lydia. Who would oversee it? Thomas asked, his voice rough with distrust. Make sure it's actually fair? That one family doesn't get more than the other? I will, Lydia said without hesitation. Personally, I'll come monthly to check the system, hear any complaints from either side, make adjustments if needed. You'll deal with me directly, not through intermediaries who might favor one family over another. And if either of you tries to cheat the system or take more than your share, I'll shut the whole thing down, and neither of you gets anything. Clear? Rowan's steward looked utterly shocked. Your Grace, that's highly irregular. Ladies don't typically involve themselves in such matters, certainly not manual oversight of irrigation. I'm not typical, Lydia said calmly, her gaze never leaving the two family heads. And I don't particularly care what ladies typically do. What I care about is ending this dispute before it destroys this community completely. Do we have an agreement or not? The families conferred quietly among themselves, heads bent together. Lydia could see the calculation in their eyes, weighing the offer against their pride, their grudges, their exhaustion from 8 months of conflict. Finally, grudgingly, they both nodded. We agree, Thomas said. Aye, William added. We'll try it. But if it doesn't work, it will work, Lydia said firmly. Because I'll make sure it does. And because you're both going to be too busy maintaining it together to have time for fighting. Shared labor builds shared interest. You'll see. The meeting ended with handshakes instead of threats, with relief instead of anger. As people filed out, several tenants stopped to thank Lydia personally, to call her Your Grace, with respect rather than mere formality. Outside in the cool evening air, Rowan caught her arm gently. You realize what you just did? Solved a water dispute that was making everyone miserable? You took personal responsibility for this estate's future. Made promises you'll have to keep for years, maybe decades. Bound yourself to Thornfield and these people in a way that... He paused, searching for words. In a way that means you're not just visiting anymore. You've committed yourself. To them. To this place. Lydia looked out at the village, the cottages with smoke rising from chimneys into the twilight, children being called in for supper, families going about their lives. Lives she was now responsible for helping protect and improve. I know, she said quietly, feeling the weight of it settle on her shoulders like a mantle. I know exactly what I just did. And? Rowan's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the hope underneath. She turned to face him, this man who'd shown her the worst of himself in this place, who'd hidden nothing and demanded she make her choice with full knowledge of what it would cost her. And I think, Lydia said slowly, choosing each word with care, that I'm ready to stop testing whether this could work. I think I'm ready to commit to making it work. Fully. Permanently. Rowan's expression transformed, hope and joy and something like disbelief flooding his features. You mean, I want partnership, real partnership, here at Thornfield, building something that matters more than anything I could build in London. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. I want to marry you, Rowan. Not because society expects it, not because of our past, not because I'm trying to reclaim what we lost, but because I choose this. Choose you. Choose us. Choose this future we could build together. For a moment he just stared at her as if she might vanish if he blinked. Then he kissed her, fierce and desperate and full of every emotion he'd been holding back for months, for over a year of separation and pain. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. I don't deserve you, he whispered. Probably not, Lydia agreed, a smile tugging at her lips. But you're going to spend the rest of your life trying to. And watching you try, watching us build something real together, that's enough for me. More than enough. They married 3 weeks later in the small stone chapel at Thornfield, the same chapel where Rowan had first asked her to give him a chance, to see if truth could rebuild what lies had destroyed. No grand society wedding with hundreds of guests and elaborate performances. No 6-hour ceremonies with excessive pageantry, just family, genuinely close friends, and the Thornfield tenants who'd become part of Lydia's world in those intense weeks of learning. Margaret stood as Lydia's witness, crying happy tears that she didn't bother hiding. Rowan's mother attended, her initial coldness thawed by Lydia's obvious competence and genuine care for her son and his responsibilities. Even Lydia's father, aged and worn by the scandal that had nearly destroyed their family, managed a genuine smile as he walked his daughter down the aisle. The ceremony was simple, the words traditional, but when Lydia said I do, she meant something deeper than ancient vows. She meant choosing partnership over safety, choosing challenge over comfort, choosing a life that would demand everything from her and give back purpose, meaning, belonging. When Rowan slipped the ring on her finger, a simple gold band engraved with the coordinates of Thornfield's exact location, she felt something settle deep in her chest. Not the butterflies of young romance or infatuation, but something steadier, deeper, more permanent. Home. The celebration afterward was pure Thornfield, simple local food instead of elaborate French cuisine, musicians from the village instead of a London orchestra, tenants and farmers mixing freely with aristocrats in a way that scandalized the traditional guests. Lord Ashford looked utterly scandalized by the informality. Lady Pemberton appeared genuinely confused by the lack of pretension. But most of the London guests seemed charmed by the authenticity, by the obvious affection between the newlyweds and their community. Lydia danced with Rowan, with her father whose hands shook with age, with the village blacksmith who'd helped design the irrigation system. She laughed freely for the first time in over a year, real laughter born of genuine joy, not the careful performance of society. As the sun set and lanterns were lit across the grounds, transforming the celebration into something magical, Margaret found her on the terrace overlooking the darkening fields. You look happy, Margaret said, studying her friend's face. Genuinely happy. Not performing it or pretending or protecting yourself. Actually happy. I am, Lydia said, surprising herself with how completely true it was. I thought happiness was something that happened to you, that love was supposed to sweep you away like in romantic novels, effortless and perfect. But this is something we're building, day by day, choice by choice, argument by argument, compromise by compromise. And that makes it real in a way fairy tales never are. He's incredibly lucky to have you. We're lucky to have each other, Lydia corrected gently. He showed me my own strength when I thought I was permanently broken. I showed him that partnership means trust, not control. That protecting someone sometimes means letting them face danger beside you. We're better together than we ever were apart, but we're also better individuals than we were before everything fell apart. Margaret hugged her tightly. I'm so glad you found your way back to each other, even if the path was absolute hell. Especially because the path was hell, Lydia said firmly. We earned this. It's not a fairy tale handed to us. It's better. It's real. The first year of marriage tested them constantly in ways no one had warned them about. Running Thornfield as true partners meant arguing, compromising, learning each other's strengths and weaknesses in practical terms rather than romantic idealization. Lydia revolutionized the estate's management with relentless efficiency, bringing in new agricultural techniques she'd researched extensively, establishing a proper school with a trained teacher from Edinburgh, creating a systematic approach where tenant concerns were heard and addressed fairly rather than ignored or handled arbitrarily. She was demanding, exacting, sometimes harsh when people failed to meet her standards, but she was scrupulously fair and the results spoke for themselves louder than any criticism. Rowan handled the political side, dealing with neighboring estates and their territorial disputes, representing their interests in Parliament where agricultural policy was being debated, maintaining the complex web of connections that kept Thornfield's influence strong in regional affairs. He learned to consult Lydia before making major decisions, to value her insight over his own initial instincts, to see her intelligence as an asset rather than a threat to his authority. They fought. Loud, passionate arguments about money allocation, about priorities when resources were limited, about whether tradition or innovation should guide their choices. But they fought fair. No personal attacks, no dredging up past betrayals, no manipulative tactics. And they always came back together, remembering that they were partners facing problems, not enemies. 6 months into the marriage, a crisis tested everything they'd built. A cholera outbreak hit Millbrook, the village directly east of Thornfield's borders. Panic spread quickly through the region. Cholera was deadly, highly contagious, and utterly terrifying. Lord Pemberton, who owned the estate between Thornfield and Millbrook, immediately closed his borders completely, refusing to allow anyone from the infected area onto his lands or to provide any assistance. We should do the same, Rowan's steward urged during an emergency meeting in the manor's study. Protect our people by keeping the disease out. It's the only rational approach. That condemns Millbrook to die alone, Lydia countered sharply, her hands flat on the table. No supplies, no medical help, no hope of recovery. They'll be completely isolated. Better them than us, the steward said bluntly, his weathered face grim. Your Grace, forgive my speaking plainly, but sentiment doesn't fight disease. Isolation does. History proves it repeatedly. The room fell silent, everyone looking to Rowan for the final decision. The weight of it was visible on his face. Hundreds of lives balanced against other hundreds, with no clear right answer. He looked at Lydia. She met his gaze steadily, unflinching. This is where partnership means something, where we choose what kind of leaders we are, what kind of people we are. Do we protect only our own and let others suffer, or do we take the risk to help fellow human beings in desperate need? The risk could kill our people, Rowan said quietly, voicing the fear everyone felt. If we allow movement between villages, if we provide aid and the disease spreads to our workers, cholera could ravage Thornfield. Everything we've built could collapse. Yes, Lydia agreed, her voice steady. It could. The risk is absolutely real. But if we don't help, if we close our borders and let Millbrook die alone, we become the kind of people who abandon others to save ourselves, who value our own lives so much more than strangers that will watch them suffer and do nothing. And I didn't survive everything we've survived. I didn't rebuild myself from complete destruction to become that kind of person. Rowan was silent for a long moment, the weight of leadership and love and conscience visible in every line of his face. Then he turned to the steward. Send our physicians. Send medical supplies, food, clean water, everything they need. Establish a quarantine station at our eastern border. Anyone coming from Millbrook gets thoroughly examined, isolated immediately if they show any symptoms, treated if they're infected. We don't close our doors and abandon people. We just make sure disease doesn't walk through those doors unchecked. Your Grace, the cost will be enormous. I'll cover it personally if the estate funds aren't sufficient, Rowan said firmly. Sell my London properties if necessary. No one dies alone because we were too afraid or too selfish to help. The steward looked like he wanted to argue further, but simply nodded, recognizing the finality in Rowan's tone. As you wish, Your Grace. As the meeting dispersed and people hurried to implement the decision, Lydia caught Rowan's hand, squeezing gently. That was the right choice. The hard choice. But the right one. I hope so, he said quietly, exhaustion evident in his voice. Because if I'm wrong, if cholera spreads to Thornfield because of this decision, if our people die because I chose compassion over caution, then we face those consequences together, Lydia said firmly, pulling him close. That's what partnership means. Sharing not just the victories but the costs of our choices, the weight of our decisions, good or bad. We chose this together. We'll live with it together. The next month was intensely tense, every day bringing new updates from the quarantine station. The physicians worked around the clock, examining everyone who came through seeking help or supplies. 3 cases of cholera were caught and isolated before they could spread further. 2 of those patients died despite treatment. The disease was merciless. But 1 survived, and her recovery gave everyone hope. Millbrook Village began to recover slowly, the outbreak contained through the medical assistance Thornfield provided. The neighboring village's gratitude was profound and genuine. Thornfield remained healthy. Not a single case crossed their borders successfully. When the crisis finally passed after 5 terrible weeks, the relief was palpable throughout the estate. But more than relief, the respect Lydia and Rowan had earned from their people deepened into something approaching devotion. They'd made the hard choice, the risky choice that valued strangers' lives, and it had proven right. You were gambling with our lives, Thomas Turner said bluntly during a village meeting held afterward to discuss the crisis response. But you were also saving others who had no one else to turn to. That took courage most leaders don't have, and we won't forget it. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled tenants. That night, lying in bed with moonlight streaming through the windows, Lydia turned to Rowan. I've been thinking about something. That's always dangerous, he teased gently, pulling her closer. She swatted his chest lightly. I'm serious. I've been thinking about legacy. About what we want Thornfield to mean and stand for. Not just now in our lifetime, but 50 years from now, 100 years from now. What do we want people to remember about what we built? What did you conclude? That we should build something permanent, something that outlasts us and continues helping people long after we're gone. Lydia propped herself up on one elbow, her expression intense. A proper hospital, not just a temporary quarantine station, but a real medical facility. For our people and the surrounding villages. Funded by the estate initially, staffed by trained physicians and nurses, equipped to handle everything from childbirth to disease outbreaks. Rowan was quiet, considering the magnitude of what she was proposing. That would be extraordinarily expensive. Years of investment before it becomes even remotely sustainable. Yes, but think of what it would mean. How many lives it could save. How many children who'd grow up healthy instead of dying from preventable diseases. How many mothers who'd survive childbirth instead of leaving orphans. It would change everything for this entire region. You're asking me to bet our financial stability on saving strangers we'll never meet. I'm asking you to bet on the future being better than the past, Lydia corrected passionately. To build something that makes the world genuinely better, even if we never see the full results ourselves. Even if it costs us personally. Rowan pulled her close, kissing her forehead with profound tenderness. You're an extraordinary woman, Lydia Blackthorne. Absolutely extraordinary. Is that a yes? That's a yes. We'll build your hospital, together, whatever it costs. 3 years after their wedding, the Thornfield Medical Center opened its doors to enormous fanfare. A beautiful 3-story stone building staffed by 4 physicians, a dozen nurses, and equipped with the latest medical technology available. It provided free care to anyone who needed it, regardless of ability to pay. The opening ceremony drew dignitaries from across England, Parliament members wanting to associate themselves with the project, physicians interested in the innovative approach, even minor royalty who'd heard about the radical concept of free medical care for common people. But the people who mattered most to Lydia were the tenants and villagers who'd helped build it, whose labor and support and belief had made it possible. Lydia stood at the entrance with Rowan beside her, their young daughter balanced on his hip, watching families tour the facility with awe and profound gratitude. Your Grace, an elderly woman said, approaching with tears streaming down her weathered face. My grandson, he's alive today because you established that quarantine station during the cholera outbreak 3 years ago. The physicians caught his infection early, treated him properly. And now this magnificent building, you've given us hope. Real hope that our children and grandchildren might live to be old instead of dying young from diseases we can't afford to treat. Lydia took the woman's gnarled hands in hers, genuinely moved by the raw emotion. We all built this together. Every person who supported it, who worked on it, who believed it was possible when everyone said we were foolish dreamers. This isn't mine or the Duke's. It's ours. It belongs to this entire community. As the woman walked away, dabbing at her eyes, Rowan leaned close. You meant that? Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? No, I mean, 3 years ago when we married, you would have said thank you politely and moved on. But you actually believe this belongs to everyone now, that we're just temporary stewards of something bigger than ourselves. We are, Lydia said simply, watching more families enter the building. That's what I learned from Thornfield, from you, from everything we've built together. Power and privilege aren't about control or showing superiority. They're about responsibility. And the best way to exercise that responsibility is by sharing it, by building things that outlast our own lives and egos. I love you, Rowan said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Not the woman I fell for in London, that sweet, trusting girl who believed everything would work out perfectly. Not even the woman I destroyed by leaving, though I'll regret that betrayal until I die. But the woman you became through all that pain, strong, brilliant, uncompromising about what matters, and somehow still generous despite every reason to become bitter. I love who you are now. I love who we are now, Lydia corrected, touching his face gently. Separately, we're good people trying our best. Together, we're unstoppable, Rowan finished, the word carrying absolute certainty. Their daughter squirmed, demanding to be put down so she could run after the other children touring the building. Rowan set her carefully on her feet and she took off immediately, fearless and determined. She's going to be a force of nature, Lydia observed fondly. Just like her mother, Rowan said. That evening, after the ceremony ended and distinguished guests departed in their fancy carriages, after the crowds dispersed and quiet returned, Lydia and Rowan walked through Thornfield's grounds hand in hand. The autumn air was crisp and clean, leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. The manor glowed with warm light behind them, welcoming and solid. In the distance, the medical center stood proud against the darkening sky, a monument to what partnership and determination could build. Do you ever regret it? Rowan asked suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Choosing this life. You could have stayed in London, married someone safer and more conventional, had an easier path without all this constant challenge and responsibility. Never, Lydia said without the slightest hesitation. Not once. Easy doesn't mean meaningful. Comfortable doesn't mean fulfilled. This, she gestured broadly to the grounds, the village lights beginning to twinkle in the distance, the medical center that would save countless lives. This matters in a way London ballrooms never could. What we're building together has real purpose, and that's worth every hard choice we've made, every argument we've had, every challenge we've faced. Even forgiving me for what I did? She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. Especially forgiving you because that choice, choosing to trust again after being shattered, to risk being hurt again after barely surviving the first time, that's what made everything else possible. I could have stayed safe in my anger and bitterness, protected myself by never letting anyone close again. But I would have been alone and lonely and small. And this, she took both his hands, this partnership, this life, this purpose we share, is so much better than safe ever could have been. Rowan kissed her then, soft and reverent, a promise that still felt as powerful and binding as their wedding vows 3 years earlier. When they pulled apart, the moon had risen full and bright, casting silver light across the landscape they'd transformed together through vision and stubbornness and love. Come on, Lydia said, tugging his hand with a smile. Let's go home. Home. Not a place she'd been born to or inherited through accident of birth, but a place she'd chosen deliberately, had fought for relentlessly, had built with her own hands and heart an unbreakable will. As they walked back toward the manor, Lydia thought about the girl she'd been just 4 years ago. Trusting, naive, easily broken by the world's cruelty. That girl was gone. Destroyed utterly by betrayal and public humiliation. But from her ashes had risen someone incomparably stronger. Someone who'd learned that survival wasn't enough. You had to build something worth surviving for. Someone who'd discovered that the greatest love stories weren't about perfection or effortless happiness, but about two imperfect people choosing each other every single day, in every hard moment, through every challenge that tried to break them. Someone who'd proven beyond doubt that being broken didn't mean being finished. It meant being reforged into something harder, sharper, and infinitely more valuable than the original. Lydia Blackthorne, once ruined, once written off as a cautionary tale about women who reached too high, had become a genuine force of nature, a leader people respected and followed willingly, a partner who made her husband better, a woman who'd changed not just her own life trajectory, but the lives of hundreds of people in her community. And as she walked into Thornfield Manor with her husband beside her, moonlight painting everything silver, she knew one truth with absolute, unshakable certainty. She had survived the absolute worst the world could do to her, and she had become unstoppable. 5 years after the wedding, on a perfect autumn afternoon, Lydia stood in the village square during the annual harvest festival. Children ran past shrieking with laughter, playing games that had been played for generations. Families gathered around long tables laden with food grown on Thornfield lands. The medical center rose in the background, now serving 5 villages and saving dozens of lives every month. Margaret had traveled from London specifically for the celebration, bringing amusing news of society's latest scandals and dramas. But it all seemed so distant now, so utterly irrelevant to the life Lydia had built far from those glittering ballrooms. "You've done something genuinely remarkable here," Margaret said, watching the joyful chaos of the celebration. "When I first met you, you were this sweet, trusting girl who believed wholeheartedly in fairy tales and happy endings. Now look at you, running a massive estate, revolutionizing agricultural practices, building hospitals, changing entire communities. You're extraordinary." "I'm just someone who refused to stay broken when the world tried to destroy me," Lydia said honestly. "Who decided that if life was going to knock me down hard, I'd stand back up stronger and more determined than before. That's not extraordinary. That's just survival followed by choice." "That's exactly what makes it extraordinary," Margaret insisted. Rowan appeared through the crowd with their daughter Catherine, named deliberately after the woman who'd tried to destroy them, transformed into something beautiful instead, perched confidently on his shoulders. At 4 years old, she was already showing signs of her mother's determination and her father's intensity. "She wants to see the new foal," Rowan said, swinging the girl down. "And she's absolutely relentless about it." "Wonder where she learned that," Lydia said dryly, taking her daughter's small hand. They walked together toward the stables, their daughter chattering excitedly between them, Margaret following with an indulgent smile. The evening sun painted everything golden, warm, perfect. As the sun finally set over Thornfield, painting the sky in spectacular shades of gold and deep crimson, Lydia looked at the life she'd built from absolute ruins. At the thriving community that existed because she'd chosen to care instead of becoming bitter. At the husband who'd hurt her terribly, and then spent every day since proving he'd learned from his catastrophic mistakes. At the daughter who represented their future, strong, loved, full of infinite possibility. This wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined as a young romantic woman in London, dreaming of perfect love and effortless happiness. It was infinitely better. Because it was real, hard-won, built on painful truth and hard-earned trust, and the terrible courage of trying again after being completely shattered. She'd been destroyed once, abandoned without explanation, publicly humiliated, written off as permanently finished. But she'd risen from those ashes not as a victim seeking sympathy or revenge, but as a survivor claiming power and using it to build something meaningful. She'd proven that being broken was just the beginning of a different story. One where you rebuilt yourself stronger, wiser, and absolutely unstoppable. And as she stood there surrounded by everything she'd fought for, everyone she'd chosen to protect and serve, Lydia Blackthorne smiled. Not the careful smile of social performance, not the brittle smile of protective armor, but the genuine, unguarded smile of a woman who'd walked through hell and built heaven on the other side. A woman who'd learned that the greatest revenge against those who'd tried to destroy her was living a life so full, so powerful, so meaningful that their cruelty became nothing more than an insignificant footnote. A woman who discovered that true strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up every single time and refusing to let anyone else dictate your worth or limit your future. She'd been the woman they tried to break. Instead, she became the woman they'd never forget. And that, Lydia thought as her daughter laughed and Rowan pulled them both close, was the truest, most hard-won happy ending of all.